Good morning, Bitcoiners, and welcome back to your economic calendar. I'm Mauricio Di Bartolomeo, co-founder and chief strategy officer here at Ledn. And as always, we bring you the analysis you need to start the week off right in Bitcoin. Today is Tuesday, May 31st, and we have a very special episode for you this week as we will be touching on a slightly different topic than what we usually cover. And today we're going to be focusing on Bitcoin's impact in the fight for human rights and financial inclusion. And we're going to talk about the Oslo Freedom Forum, an event that we had the privilege of participating in last week. And we're going to cover some of the stories that were shared there and which really highlight the impact, the positive impact that Bitcoin is having around the globe for financial inclusion. We're also going to talk about macroeconomics and some of what's happening in the US with President Biden calling a meeting with Chair Fed Jerome Powell and Treasury Secretary Yellen to talk about inflation today. We're going to discuss that as well and what we can expect from the Fed's next meeting, which happens in June 14th, 15th. So lots to cover today. Grab your coffees. It's going to be a great one. Now, before we get started with today's analysis, we also wanted to share that we recently published our interest rates as of June 1st. If you're a Ledn client, you already have them in your inbox, but you can see them right here behind the screen or in the screen behind me. As you can see, the rates as of June 1st will remain the same. Balances up to 0.1 BTC will earn 5.25% APY. Balances above 0.1 Bitcoin will earn 2% APY, and in the USDC savings accounts, all balances will earn a rate of 7.5% APY. So if you don't yet have a Ledn account, check us out at ledn.io and learn how you can start earning the best interest rates in your favorite assets. Okay, and as mentioned, today we're going to do a sidebar. Basically to talk about the role that Bitcoin's playing in the global fight for human rights and financial inclusion. And so I wanted to share, some thoughts and some notes from attending the Oslo Freedom Forum last week. So again, last week I had the opportunity to participate in the Oslo Freedom Forum, which was hosted by the Human Rights Foundation to talk about Bitcoin. I joined a delegation of many other Bitcoiners that were at the event essentially to talk about our experiences with Bitcoin. I met some amazing people from all over the world, and it was surreal to listen to their stories about how they were using Bitcoin to solve problems when they were faced with adversity. Some of the most incredible stories that I heard were Roya Mahoub's story from Afghanistan. She spoke about how she was teaching women in Afghanistan how to use Bitcoin so that they could receive and send funds independently. Women in Afghanistan are not currently allowed to open a bank account without the consent and permission from their husbands. Roya sees Bitcoin as a tool to bypass financial and social barriers that helps empower women in Afghanistan. Her story was incredibly powerful and moving. Ludmila Kozlova from Ukraine spoke about how she used Bitcoin and cryptocurrency to receive donations instantly, where bank transfers from neighboring countries like Poland would take more than 2 weeks to clear and reach their bank accounts. The donations that they received were immensely time sensitive, and thanks to Bitcoin and crypto, she and her team were able to purchase and deliver aid to thousands of Ukrainians, including bulletproof vests and helmets. Imagine what would have happened if those donations took 2 weeks to get there instead of seconds, like they did with Bitcoin and cryptocurrency. I was able to share our story, my family's story, on how my family was able to use Bitcoin, the Bitcoin that we had mined, and the knowledge that we gained from doing so to establish ourselves in new countries by building Bitcoin businesses. And how now we use Bitcoin at Ledn as an equalizer and are able to lend dollars to clients from all over the world at the exact same rates, quality of service, without discriminating on their nationality, gender, race, or religion. This was not possible until Bitcoin. And this event really celebrated not just our story, but everyone's story that has basically used Bitcoin to solve a very real problem for their people in their communities. This is a picture of the panel that I had the privilege of sharing with Roya and Abubakar, who's the gentleman on your left. And on the right is Alex Gladstein, who's the Chief Strategy Officer at the Human Rights Foundation, and who I am very thankful for the invitation to attend this event. So thank you, Alex. One of the highlights of the trip, and I just wanted to highlight this again, One of the highlights of the trip was joining a delegation of 12 Bitcoiners that visited the Norwegian parliament to talk about Bitcoin's utility from a global perspective and also to discuss its environmental implications around mining. It was incredibly inspiring. The experience overall was incredibly inspiring, and it really drove home the true impact that Bitcoin is having on the global fight for freedom and financial inclusion. To the many Bitcoiners around the world, or to many Bitcoiners around the world, Bitcoin is about solving very real problems: financial inclusion and equal access to credit. The price and the volatility of Bitcoin are afterthoughts to many that are basically looking at Bitcoin as a tool to solve these problems. I strongly recommend visiting the Oslo Freedom Forum's YouTube page, where you can catch the entire conference content for free. Now, checking in on other news as we do to look at what's happening in the markets. This week, and again, just going back into Bitcoin, we wanted to highlight some key events that occurred that may have some near and medium-term implications. So the SEC last week rejected another Bitcoin spot ETF application. This time it was an application from One River Asset Management, and this was for their carbon neutral Bitcoin spot ETF. The news you see shared here by Kitco. Now, the news of this new spot ETF Bitcoin denial sent the units of the Grayscale Bitcoin Trust into a new record discount relative to the value of the Bitcoin that the fund holds natively. Now, I'm just going to show you what that looks like here. And here we're just going to pull up the discount from the GBTC discount to the net asset value of the units. As you can see, last week it reached brand new negative territory. It's currently trading at a discount of nearly 30% relative to the value of the Bitcoin that the fund holds. So again, the units of the fund are trading below the value of the redeemable Bitcoin within the fund. And so in other words, what this means is that investors have very little or low expectations that this GBTC fund will be turned into an ETF anytime soon. As we know, when investors feel like the expectations of it turning into an ETF are grinding higher, the unit value of the fund trades closer to the net asset value of the fund, because essentially when the fund becomes an ETF, the net asset value, the units should trade at the same value of the underlying Bitcoin that the fund holds. Right now, we're seeing that the units are trading at a discount, but that's because there is no easy way to essentially create or redeem units because it's a closed fund right now. And so again, all this means is that a new ETF rejection, the SEC rejected one more application. Investors now feel like the potential of GBTC turning into an spot ETF is even further down the line, and therefore the units are trading at an even larger discount to the value of the Bitcoin that it holds. And so, again, this is just something to keep in mind as many people still wait for the midsummer decision that the SEC has to issue on GBTC. That was seen by many as the potential next catalyst for a potential move higher. But again, we're seeing some signs that may indicate that approval might still be a little bit further away than just a few weeks. So beyond this, just checking in on the Bitcoin price. This is the weekly chart, and we've seen here that Bitcoin now has 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 weeks of essentially just dropping prices, essentially red candles. Again, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 candles. So 9 negative consecutive down weeks. This is something that Bitcoin hasn't seen, I believe, in its history or anywhere near its recent history, so many weeks of downward pressure. But this is not just isolated to Bitcoin. This is happening across essentially most asset prices, including the S&P, NASDAQ, etc. Now, what we have started to see, which is it's interesting, is there's been a pickup in short activity around Bitcoin, as you can see from the yellow boxes here. Now, we have been following these pickups in activity, as you can see, again, outlined by these yellow boxes, because what we wanted to highlight here is that once you overlay price on top of the short interest, you start seeing some interesting trends. So as you can see from the yellow boxes, over the last 2 years, when the market has reached turning points. Turning points as in, right in November 2020, we saw an increase in short interest right before the breakout that essentially took Bitcoin beyond $20,000. Then around May last year, so essentially last time, a year ago, essentially around this time, we started seeing a big surge in short interest, and that occurred right before the bounce back from 30 all the way back to 69. We saw some short interest here around the sort of first quarter of the year when the market basically took a pause and went on a brief relief rally up until the third week of March. And we are starting to see some pickup of activity in the short interest right now at these current levels. So this current $30,000 level that we've been highlighting, currently actually trading close to 32,000, has been a battleground for Bitcoin, a very tough battleground for Bitcoin. And counterintuitively, the growing short interest at these levels is actually, or could be actually, a signal that the market may be reaching a turning point. Now, however, while Bitcoin fundamentals continue to look great, macro conditions remain pretty bleak, and investors should be cautious of getting too upbeat without much economic data really sort of showing that we've turned the tide in terms of the other macro trends that we have been seeing. After all, the concept of relief rallies got their name for a reason. Keep in mind that Bitcoin's correlation with equity markets is near all-time highs. And again, we're going to touch on the meeting that President Biden just called on with Yellen and Jerome Powell to talk about inflation, because there's not really that many things that the Fed can do to prevent inflation other than continue raising interest rates, which essentially puts a bit of a gray cloud on the overall economy. And that includes Bitcoin, equity markets, and asset prices in general. So more on our next section. And as always, we leave you with what's ahead for the week. So as we mentioned at the start, the President Biden called a meeting today with Jerome Powell and Janet Yellen. That's the president of the Federal Reserve and the Treasury of the Secretary. So these two people outside of Joe Biden control essentially the money supply in the United States. And the reason Joe Biden has called them in is essentially to have a talk around inflation in the United States. Now, with the Fed has a dual mandate. The Federal Reserve is the central bank of the United States, and it has two mandates. One, to foster full employment, and two, to keep stable prices and stable interest rates. So given that unemployment is at pre-pandemic levels and only seemingly getting better, the Fed's main goal right now is to essentially get a grip on inflation. Now, to get a grip on inflation, there's two ways you can kind of do that. One, increase the supply of goods and services. The Fed cannot do that. And the second way you can curb inflation is by bringing down demand. So what this meaning essentially may be trying to lay the groundwork for is basically to say that the Fed needs to get a grip on inflation, and it has the sort of full support of the US government to continue to do so. Interestingly, the Fed's next meeting and interest rate decision happens 2 weeks from now. So what this could be doing is setting the stage for another 50 basis points hike from the Fed. And when this happens, this will ultimately continue putting pressure on asset prices in general. As we know, when you raise interest rates, you raise people's costs for their mortgages, and you raise companies' debt servicing costs, which again, both of those equate to less disposable income in the economy for either new jobs or people to just generally spend. This overall brings down aggregate demand, which should help put a lid on inflation, but that is not without pain. So this may not be the last meeting that these three people hold as a group, as the US government will continue trying to reinforce the American people that they have a plan to essentially get inflation under control. And that, painful as this may be, it's in the long-term interest of everybody in the US economy. So all that being said, we have a light week of economic data out of the US. This week we get the Case-Shiller Index, which is a read on home prices. Year over year, home prices in the US as of last month had gone up 20%, 19.8%. So the market will likely cheer a number that is lower than that, because it means that the Fed can essentially try to start taking its foot off the gas if things stop soaring in double-digit amounts. But again, the data will be pretty important for the Fed. We also get a look at U.S. unemployment, but again, this is kind of sitting at pre-pandemic levels. It's projected to get even better from 3.6% in March to 3.5% in April. So again, the Fed seems to have this really under control. So barring any surprises, the conversation will be focused squarely around inflation. So that means we've reached the end of the show today. If you learned something, if you enjoyed it, I welcome you to subscribe to our channel, thumbs up it, share it with your friends. If you don't yet have a Ledn account, I welcome you to check us out at ledn.io and learn how you can earn the best interest rates for your stablecoins, USDC and Bitcoin. And we also have the best rates for dollar loans backed by your Bitcoin if you need liquidity and don't want to sell your stack. And make sure to check out our most recent product, the Bitcoin Mortgage, which lets you buy a house as big as your stack. Thank you so much, everybody. Take care and see you next week.